to actually delete things. So when we render the list item, we just copy that template item, right? Piece of cake. The delete button's already in there, but it doesn't do anything. So we need to add an event listener to it so that it does something when clicked. We could target it using the selectors that are already there, like alert button. Alert and warning, those are just there for the colors, so I would prefer to actually put more descriptive classes on those personally. So I say we go ahead and do that. This button is a delete or remove button, so I'm going to say, I'll put it between alert and button, why not? So I'll say remove here, I'll say fave here. So we can target it with that. So when do we target it? We don't do it when the page first loads, unlike our other event listener, because we're going to be cloning this thing later. So the copy doesn't even exist yet. So we're not going to actually start listening for that event until after we clone this thing. Once we clone this thing, then we can add an event listener to the clone. So that's what we need to do here. So we have a couple other things we do. We remove the class template. We set the data-id attribute. And we set the text content. And then I say we start adding various event listeners. The first one we're going to do is that remove button. So we're going to need to do a query selector to get the button. Then we're going to add an event listener to that. So I'm going to do this thing again, where I put line breaks between the dots just so it's easier to read in the end. Same as if I had put it all on one line, but I'm going to do item.querySelector. Why item.querySelector instead of document.querySelector? Because I'm not looking on the entire page. That would just find the first delete button it came to, which may or may not be the one. Actually, we know it wouldn't be because this thing isn't even in the DOM yet, right? So document.querySelector is not going to find this. It is not on the DOM yet. But you can always look inside another element for a selector, and it will get just the descendants of that element that match the selector. Selector I'm going to do, I want to find something that has the class of remove, that also has the class of button, which also ends up reading kind of nicely. Remove button, right? That's exactly what we're looking for. So if you have two different classes and you want them to be on the same element, you don't put a space in between. This finds an element that has both of those classes. Once I have it, I want to add an event listener to it. The event I'm listening for is a click. And what do I want it to do? I want to remove the dang thing. Now, I haven't actually written the method that does that yet, right? But for the moment, let's just pretend it's already there. Right? For the function you want, not the one you have. So let's say this.removeFlick, not this removeFlick parentheses, right? That would run it right there on the spot. We're not running this method ourselves. It's running only when this thing is clicked. So we need to actually pass the function itself as an argument to add event listener. So we should probably actually write this method. Why is it a method? Because it is a function that is a property of an object. So I will add it right after init before render list item. It is called removeFlick. It's an event handler, isn't it? Don't forget your comma. It's an event handler, which means that the event is always going to get passed in as an argument, right? What's the target of this event? Say again? The button, right? Yeah, the thing being clicked. Since that's the event you're listening for, the event target will be the button that you clicked on. So somehow we need to find, because the thing we actually want to remove is the item, right? The list item. So we need to find the list item from the button. Looking at the HTML, Looks like the parent of this button is this span, and the parent of that is the LI, which is the thing we actually want to move. So there are a couple ways we could do this. We could get the parent, and then we could get the parent of the parent. There are lots of ways of traversing the DOM. In other words, going from one node to another by going up and down the tree. So how about that? Is there something like parent? Let's look at MDN. Parent node. Node.parent node. That's a thing. So what if we did, I'm just going to console log this. Console log event.target, that's the button, right? .parent node, and we think that should be it. The parent of the button is the span. The parent of the span is the LI. So is that the right thing? Yeah, that's the LI. That works. Now, if we go through later and we change our markup in any way, if there's another element around those, that's going to break. What would be really nice is if we could say, look at my parent. If that's the LI, then stop. If not, keep going. If that next thing, if the parent of that is the LI, then stop. Otherwise, keep going. And just checking its ancestors. Its parents, grandparents, etc., all the way up the tree. So we'll never find, an adjacent LI. It'll always be the one that's up there, but how many levels there are in between the two wouldn't matter. It'd be really cool if there were something like that. And of course, I wouldn't be saying this unless there were. And it is called, as you probably found when looking from my code from last year, closest. Element.closest. The element.closest method returns the closest ancestor of the current element, or the current element itself, which matches the selectors given in parameters. If there isn't such an ancestor, it returns null. So it's a little like query selector, but the other way around. Query selector looks at the descendants, the children, grandchildren, etc. of an element. Closest looks at ancestors, parents on up. So query selector looks down the tree, closest looks up the tree, and it actually starts with the element itself. So if we ran closest on the LI and we were looking for the LI, it would return it. So what do we want to find? It's an LI, but the point is it's the flick. It has the class of flick. That was our way of identifying that that's the kind of thing this is. If we change the markup later and make this a div instead of an LI, it would still work if the selector we're looking for is flick, which is kind of what I want to do. So in my JavaScript, I'm going to say event.target.closest and pass in the selector .flick. So we'll find something with a class of flick. And if we're right and we refresh, it should do the same thing. Click delete, and indeed, we still find the LI. Of course, I don't really want to console log it. I want to do something with it. So we'll go ahead and save this to a variable, const item. Then what do I want to do with the item? I want to get it the heck out of there, right? Well, it just so happens that DOM elements have a method called remove. And it does just what it sounds like. It takes it out of the DOM. Refresh. Try again. Let's add some. Let's delete this one right here. And it's gone. Deleted. So just a two-line method. And grabbing the thing from the page, adding an event listener. And the event listener just does 2 lines. So again, we find the button. We add an event listener to the button. inside the event handler, we go from the button, which is simply event target. We look at itself and its ancestors until we find an element with a class of flick, because the closest one we should find is the list item that we want to remove. So we save that to a variable, and then we remove that item from the DOM, and that's it. We did it. Now, we haven't removed it from the array yet, right? But we have accomplished something, so that is worthy of a commit. Remove flicks from the DOM, but not the array.